You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. In this show, we go beyond the campfire stories to bring you firsthand encounters from people who say they've seen something impossible, from backwoods trails and remote mountain haulers to quiet farms and crowded highways. The stories come from everywhere, and each one leaves us with more questions than answers. These are the voices of the people who've lived it, so settle in, because today you'll hear another account that just might change the way you see the woods forever. So stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, I've got the privilege of talking to Joe today. Joe is an individual that has a history of being a hunter, a fisherman. He's also an Air Force veteran, and also more specifically a Vietnam veteran as well. First off, thank you for your service regarding both of those things, Joe. And welcome to the show today. How are you, sir?
I'm good, and thank you for acknowledging my service. You were worth it.
So, Joe, I know a little bit about your experience, and it happened quite a ways back in time, and I'm just very interested in what you had experienced that day. So I would say feel free to take us back to that time when you had that encounter out in the swamp, correct?
That's correct. And I'm more than happy to do that. I grew up in southwest Georgia and hunted deer and quail and turkey and doves and all of that. And one of the things I was privileged to do is there are a lot of large plantations around my hometown of Albany, Georgia. And I had the privilege of being able to hunt on those plantations. One of those bordered on a very large swamp called the Coolawahee. One of the things that people don't really know about the South is most of the swamps in the South the edges are very thick with brush and trees and undergrowth and all those things for about 100 yards in. But once you get down inside in the center of a swamp, it opens up quite a bit, and visibility is probably 200 to 300 yards sometimes. What I was doing is deer hunting. My brother and I and several of our friends would hunt together, and we had marked ourselves paths with reflective tape on trees so that we could find our stands before daylight. And these reflections would allow us to move that 100 yards through the thick brush to get to where our stands were. This particular morning, I was using what's called a climbing tree stand. Is one where you strap it on your feet and you are able to climb a tree and sit in the stand for most of the day. So I did get down to my stand before daylight, got up in the tree, probably 25 feet up, and had a great view. I was about 20, 30 yards from the stream, the Coolawahee Creek that flowed through this swamp, and deer hunting, and the sun came up, and that's always a beautiful time in the woods. The birds were singing, the squirrels, and we have a lot of armadillos in South Georgia. They were all in the underbrush and leaves, and there were a lot of leaves, as you can imagine, on the ground, and pine straw and all those kind of things. And this was getting very good daylight. And all of a sudden, the birds and the animals stopped. There was no sound. And I thought, what in the world? I thought maybe deer were coming or a herd or something like that. And then to my right, I saw a hunter, or what I thought was a hunter, walking. He was all in gray. And I thought, boy, that's a sure way to get yourself shot during deer season. And I thought, that's really strange. And he had a very strange gait when he was walking, and he wasn't making any noise in the leaves. I would say when I first saw him, he was probably 100 yards away. He was walking down the path of the Coolawahee Creek on the other side of the creek from me. And one of the things that you learn very early on when you're a hunter is you don't surprise anyone in the woods. It's a sure way to get yourself shot. So I didn't say anything, but this person, I thought, I can't imagine why, but I thought it was really strange the way they were moving and walking, and their arms seemed to be a bit long. But this particular, I'll call it a creature because of what I believe now, walked by a tree that was on the other side of the creek from me, and its head passed by a bowl in the tree where a limb had broken off and left a scar on the tree, and its head passed right by that as it continued walking. Wasn't looking to the right or to the left at all, looking straight ahead. Was in no hurry, but as I say, had a very strange gait. It was very fluid, just really a strange gait, the way it was walking. Finally disappeared to my left, probably 200 yards away. I could no longer see the animal or the person or whatever it was at that time. And then the birds started singing again. And then the creatures started coming out in the leaves and things. And so I stayed in my stand probably another 2, maybe 3 hours until almost noon, and got down and decided I wanted to go over and see if this person left any traces of itself, any footprints or anything, maybe what kind of boots they had on or whatever. And I got over to this tree where the head went by, and I couldn't reach that bowl. It was a good 10 feet off the ground. So this creature was 8 to 10 feet tall, had to have been, in order for that head to pass by that bowl the way I saw it. Even looking at it down at an angle, it was still, it had covered that bowl when he walked by. And I thought, oh my Lord, I've just seen we call them skunk apes in the South because they supposedly have a very strong odor, although I never smelled this particular creature. So as you can imagine, my heart was racing at the moment. I thought, what have I seen? What in the world is going on here? So I came back out and met my hunting partner that was with me and told him the story. And he's first of all laughed. And then he saw how shaking I was and how fearful I appeared to be. And he said, "You're not kidding, are you?" I said, "No, I am not kidding. I don't know what I saw, but it was huge. It was all gray, and it didn't make any noise. I don't know what it was." We continued to hunt the swamp. Never saw anything again. This was probably in the fall of 1966, 67. I was in college, and I was home from college, and usually when I get home in the fall, I would always hunt. And so I never saw another sign at all. I didn't see any footprints. In fact, it looked like the leaves hadn't even been disturbed where this creature had walked. So I couldn't see a path. I couldn't see any effect of where it had been. So I was skeptical at first, but the more I thought about it and the more I have read about Sasquatch and the things that have occurred, I became more and more convinced that's what I saw. And like I said, that's a lot of years ago, but I can see it in my mind just as if it happened yesterday. It has stuck with me all these years. I have never forgotten a single nuance or minuscule moment that all happened while I was watching this creature walk. So it's convinced me that there are creatures that we don't know about that live, and they are very good at avoiding human nature. I don't think this creature had any awareness that I was there or that I had even been there. I was up pretty high. Of course, I think my scent would have not been there by the time I saw it. So I was convinced and remain convinced to this day. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Oh, absolutely. So it sounds like you were only about 20 to 30 yards away from where it passed by that tree?
Yeah, 30 to maybe 40.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range. But yeah, and this creek is very small. You can step across it, but it's always got water in it. It never goes dry. And so I just stepped across the creek to go see. And this tree that I'm talking about, the bowl was on, it's probably 10 yards the other side of the creek.
Okay. So for reference listeners, you're looking at about potentially, think of a tennis court and a half of a tennis court away is what we're looking at there. You notice, or you mentioned a few times that there is something strange about the gait of the creature and that it was very fluid. Can you just describe or go into any more detail what that exactly means?
Yeah, I know this is going to sound really strange, but it looked almost like an ice skater. You know how they're fluid and everything is smooth, and it doesn't appear they're taking steps. And I would have thought that would have disturbed leaves and everything a lot, but that's what it appeared to me. Is it wasn't making steps. But it was moving very fluidly. But I could tell there were two legs. You could see the legs moving, but it was as if they were ice skating.
So that's interesting. And to ask a little bit more about that, I'm picturing how an ice skater moves in my mind. Is it more the fact that they were gliding over the ground, or were they actually making the same movements that a ice skater would make as well?
I think he was making the same movements. I don't think he was gliding over the ground at all, but he was definitely walking on the leaves. The way it was walking, I keep saying he, but the way it was walking wasn't disturbing the leaves, and yet it was very fluid in the way that he was moving his legs.
That's just the weirdest thing, because it is very strange to report that. But even stranger is that you hear an equivalent of this in a lot of different reports. You hear it looked like a cross-country skier. I hear that one a lot. Or it was just the way it was moving as it walked. It just didn't make sense. So I'd say what you experienced definitely lines up with a lot of other reports I get as well. Was it doing anything out of the ordinary with its arms at that time?
No, just they were swinging with each stride. I can't remember. I think, if I remember correctly, I'm closing my eyes and envisioning this again. The opposite arm would swing forward as the opposite leg swung forward. So left arm, right leg, right arm, left leg, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Did you notice anything? Were you able to see anything about the hands at all?
No, I thought, again, my first impression was this was a hunter who was putting themselves in a lot of danger because they were all in gray. And it was a very pronounced gray color, darkish gray, but very gray. I thought they had gloves on. That was the only impression I had, even possibly mittens. It was not a terribly cold morning, but a cool morning. We didn't have frost that morning or anything, but it was cool, and I thought they had gloves on.
And what do you think would make you think that they had gloves or mittens on?
I guess because I couldn't see fingers. It was almost like maybe they had mittens on. I didn't notice any fingers at all.
That makes sense. You had already referred to it as male, but then you're like, I'm not really sure. Was it a thing where was there anything that showed you that, hey, I might be looking at a male or a female, or really no details that could show that?
No, I really couldn't. I didn't see any genitalia at all. I didn't see any mammary glands or anything like that. It was too far, I think, probably to know that anyway, although I think if it had mammary glands, I could have told because I could see its chest pretty well. So I would say I didn't see any characteristics that would tell me one way or the other.
Gotcha. There's a lot of different reports about how the Bigfoot looks muscle structure wise that you hear. And some people say that it's extremely built like an athlete or a football player or bodybuilder. And sometimes it's more lean. Do you remember anything about how the muscles seem to be or anything of that?
It was quite lean, which when I thought about it after and in the years ensuing, when I see film and videos of people that have shot, everyone seems to be quite well built, but this animal was quite lean.
Gotcha. And did you get a feel for how old it might have been? Sometimes people report it just had an older look to it or maybe a younger look to it.
I would say younger, just because of the way it moved. It didn't seem to have any hesitation or any issues with movement at all, which happens when we all get older. But I would say my impression would be it was younger.
Sure. How long total do you think the whole sighting took?
Probably 5 to 7 minutes. From the time I saw him was about maybe 200 yards away until he disappeared was another 200 to 300 yards downstream. So I would say 5 to 7 minutes. He never stopped, was never looked around, definitely was going somewhere and with purpose, and just wasn't looking around, noting anything around it, definitely looking straight ahead the whole time.
So I just want to make sure that, so it is actually 5 to 7 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Most people, I expect to hear the word seconds when I ask that question, but 5 to 7 minutes. Wow.
Yeah, when you're sitting in a deer stand, sometimes time goes really fast, particularly if you're looking at a deer or an animal. And I've seen bobcats with kittens in the woods. I've seen turkeys, a lot of deer, skunks. I've seen all kinds of creatures in the woods from a tree stand, and this one was definitely unique. And the time, I would say at least that, because it was not in a hurry. It definitely was not running, but it was a steady gait to cover that kind of distance. I would say, yeah, it was about 5 minutes or 5 to 7.
Was there anything interesting about the posture of it as it walked?
It was leaning forward from the waist, not terribly, but I noticed that because in those days I was an athlete, and I know when you're walking or running, you're always taught to get your shoulders back over your hips. This creature had the shoulders were in front of the hips when it was walking.
And okay, did it seem? How am I going to say this? Did you notice any specific details about the head shape or the upper part of the body, like shoulders and above?
Yes, I thought when I first saw it, like I said, I thought it was a hunter with a hood on, but everything was gray. And then when it got closer, I could see that it was shaggy, but a lot of hunters wear what's called a ghillie suit, which is very shaggy to look like leaves or brush or whatever. I still thought it was a hunter, but I did not see a weapon of any kind. And it's to this day, I still question myself of, if you didn't see a weapon, why did you continue to think it was a hunter? Because when it went out of sight, I still thought it was a hunter. And I had no idea how really tall this creature was. But once I went over to this tree and put my hand up and realized I couldn't reach where his head had passed, I thought, that is no hunter. There is nobody I know that is that tall. But the head, the only thing I noticed is it was like a peak on the head. I don't recall seeing ears, because again, I had assumed it was a hunter with a hood on that would have covered his ears, so I probably would have blanked that out anyway. But I just said, oh, he's got why the color gray? I couldn't reconcile that in my mind. Why would anybody be in the woods with gray on during deer season? But I still had it in my mind because I was incredulous that it could have been something other than a human being, frankly. But once I got down and went over and realized how tall it was, I thought, oh my Lord, I have seen a skunk ape. Yeah. It's still, I get chills when I think about it, still.
Oh, absolutely. And I would as well. That would be with me, as you said, for the rest of my life.
It has been for me. And I'm
Absolutely.
79 years old, and this was, as like I said, it's as clear to me as it was yesterday.
Using that reference point of the tree when it walked in front of it, were you also able to get a sense of how big the head was on what you saw? Like if you could compare it to maybe a household item?
Well, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that before. But now that I think about it, the head wasn't that large. I would say maybe the size of trying to think what I could compare it to, maybe a little larger than perhaps a toaster.
Okay, sure.
But now that I think about it and I'm picturing it again, the head was pretty small for the body.
What did its neck seem like? Or what do you remember about the details of the neck?
It looked like his head was sitting right on his shoulders.
Okay, yep. Gotcha.
Didn't seem to have a neck.
So the whole time you're getting a side profile view, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
When I first saw it, it was half front, half side, and then as it walked past me, then I got to look at it from behind.
What were the muscles like? Were you able to see muscles through the hair, or were there points where, like, there are patches where there are no hair and you were able to really see muscles underneath?
I did not, and as I'm talking about it now, I think part of it was my mindset was this is a hunter. And so I wasn't really looking for anything other than this is a hunter in a ghillie suit. Why it's gray, I have no idea. But I did not notice any musculature at all.
Gotcha. Were you able to see any details of the face at any time?
I could see where the eye sockets were, but I could not see the eyes.
So you saw the eye sockets. Do you mean you're seeing like maybe the side view of the face and you can see the eye socket like jutting out? Yeah.
Well, not jutting out so much because, again, I thought it was a hunter with a hood on, and I thought it was strange. I could see the darkness of where the eyes sockets were, but I could not see eyes.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So it's like they were deeply hidden in these eyelids. Okay.
Correct.
Did it seem to have hair covering its face as well?
Yes. Again, I thought it was a hoodie type thing that was zipped all the way up, and it must have had, now that I think about it, he must have had some kind of protection over its face because it was all gray. And I'm sure now it was hair, but I couldn't tell much about length other than it was relatively short because I thought it was a hoodie.
Sure.
So it couldn't have made an impression of being anything more than that. So it had to have been short hair on the face.
And this whole time, let's say 5 to 7 minutes, you're saying there's no sound at all? No
sound at all. Okay. It didn't make any noises. I couldn't hear the footsteps. I couldn't hear the leaves rustling, which in that environment in the fall is fairly dry in that part of the world, and those leaves make a lot of noise. And I was shocked when I didn't hear anything.
Did you have anything on your person that would have been like a pocket watch or a watch or something that runs on a battery at that time?
No, not in the. I did have my wristwatch on, but it was one of those back in those days that wound itself by the movement on your arm. It didn't have a battery.
That's true. Good point. Yeah. We're talking a 1966 or 1967.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was a few years ago.
Absolutely. Did you, or in this area, have you ever noticed anything else weird that doesn't make sense? Anything besides what you saw that day?
No, I remember once in a different part of this particular swamp, I was quite a ways upstream, maybe half a mile from where this encounter happened. There were small pine trees that had been uprooted and leaned together. And it was only maybe 4 or 5. So it wasn't like it was a shelter or anything. But that's the only thing I can remember that I thought was strange, because they'd been uprooted and there was nothing around them that had been uprooted. So I frankly didn't think too much about it until now that I'm making a connection, and maybe because I don't know of what other animal could have uprooted those pine trees, because pine trees have a pretty long taproot and it's hard to get them out of the ground.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely worth noticing. At any point in this area, did you ever notice anything like strange lights or light type objects floating around, anything like that?
I did not, but one of the guys that we hunted with said he saw a light, and this was probably, I'm not even sure it was the same year, but in the same swamp, saw a light floating that it was dull. It wasn't very bright. He thought it was somebody with a flashlight, but it moved and then it stopped and then just went out. And he thought it was somebody with a flashlight that got to their tree stand and climbed. But that was the only instance I can ever remember of anybody talking about a light in that swamp.
And how far away from where your instance happened would have been his? Do you have any location info there?
It was probably, he was further. It could have been a mile.
Okay. Gotcha. During your experience, did you notice any smells that were out of the ordinary?
I didn't. And I thought that was unusual because, like I say, that's the deal in the South, is they call them skunk apes because they smell so strongly, but I didn't. And I have since, I've hunted, I moved to the Northwest. I live in the Spokane, Washington area now, and I've hunted elk, and you can smell elk from a long way off because they have a very distinct odor. But I did not, that morning, I did not smell anything unusual.
During your time in the tree stand, did you notice the temperature fluctuating a lot? At any point, did it get either really hot or really cold?
No, I did not.
Okay. And did you notice any sounds that didn't make sense that shouldn't be in the woods that same day or other days you were out there?
Not that I can think of. The only other experience I ever had like that was in a different part of the swamp. I was sitting on a tree stump on the ground before daylight and had a wildcat scream. And bobcats are very prolific in the South, and a bobcat that screams sounds like a woman screaming. And that I heard one scream, which made me wish I was in a tree stand, but never saw anything, never, just the one scream, and I never heard it again.
Yeah, I've heard that myself, and it's one of the weirdest sounds. It's very unsettling.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it really is. Oh, in this area, when you were living in this area, did you ever hear any reports of, I guess we could say, people seeing things in the sky floating around like UFOs or other creatures besides Bigfoot?
Not at that time, south of us, we were only about, Albany's about 40, 50 miles from the Florida border. And I remember there were people in Florida that were reporting UFOs in the Pensacola area. Pensacola is probably 2 hours from Albany. But other than that, no. I don't remember anybody in the Albany area seeing anything that they would call UFOs. But the truth is, in those days, if people had seen it, they probably wouldn't have said anything.
Gotcha. I want to ask, sorry, there's some questions I want to ask you, but I want to ask if it's okay to do it first.
Sure.
So it does have to do with your service in Vietnam, because there is an overlap with this subject. And honestly, I've never been able to ask this to a Vietnam veteran because it is hard to get that contact. So when you were over in Vietnam during the time frame, I would guess after the 60s, right?
I was there in 1971.
Okay. There are reports that have come out over the years where there were certain service individuals in Vietnam where they would actually have encounters or sightings of what was called a rock ape, which is pretty much another form of Bigfoot, but that would have been sighted in Vietnam during the time of the Vietnam War. Is that anything that you had heard yourself over there in that area?
Absolutely, yes. I was stationed at a radar site on top of a mountain called Monkey Mountain. It's right outside Da Nang. And there were a species of what we call rock apes that lived on Monkey Mountain. And a lot of us we lived at the base of the mountain. And when we were going up and down for our duty, we rode in what's called a 6x truck up and down the mountain. But a lot of guys would jog up and down. It was a paved road up and down the mountain. And many times the rock apes would throw rocks at them as they ran by.
Oh, wow. So
many times.
What size of rocks were they throwing at them?
They were probably a pound in weight, and throwing these rocks, heaving them at these guys as they jogged by. And we mostly just avoided them. But I know the Vietnamese harvested, I don't know if you know what kudzu is.
Sure, yeah.
Their kudzu grew quite prolifically on the mountain, and that mountain was sprayed a lot with Agent Orange. But the Vietnamese would harvest kudzu and eat it. And I'm rated at 100% disabled because of Agent Orange, because we got it sprayed on us many times on this mountain. But it really seemed to have little to no effect on the rock apes. But the Agent Orange effects occur many years, much longer time period than what we would have seen on these rock apes. But there weren't a lot of them. I only saw, in my experience, I think I may have seen 3. One time I saw 2, and then one other time, but they weren't doing anything other than looking like apes in the woods. They weren't throwing, or they could see me and they were making what I would call monkey noises. But other than that, they behaved like apes when I saw them.
Okay, so you had multiple times where you actually had sightings yourself. That is fascinating. Would you say what you saw in Vietnam was similar to what you saw in Georgia, or was it extremely different?
They're extremely different. These rock apes were reddish brown in color, and I don't recall any gray on any of them. And they were smaller. The ones that we saw, if they were 5 feet tall, I'd be surprised.
How far away were you from them when you would have your sightings of them?
20 feet, maybe.
Gotcha. Were you able to see any facial features in those sightings?
Yes, I would say they appeared more like chimpanzees than anything in the face. big mouth, teeth, because they would grimace at you and try and show their displeasure at your presence, that kind of thing. So I would say that's what they mostly reminded me of, were chimpanzees or very small gorillas.
So that's really interesting. So really small gorillas. What was it about them that would make you think that it looked like a small gorilla?
They were built pretty stoutly, and they had their arms were, the upper arm was rather large. They had a long forearm and pretty strong legs, particularly the thigh area was pretty pronounced. That's what made me think of it. And they did not have the pronounced belly that you see on most gorillas. They were fairly lean in that regard, but they were obviously very muscular.
Were there ever any situations where there would be extremely close interactions between the service men there and the rock apes?
Other than the rock throwing, not that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Was it a thing where people you're serving with over there, people would talk about it, be like, hey, you're new here, you got to know there's these big apes out in the woods, they're going to throw rocks at you? Or were you told about this and talked to about it by maybe higher ups as well?
No, not by higher ups, but for those that were equal. I was a second lieutenant when I went there. And so there were a lot of us because of all the radar controllers were officers. And then we had enlisted as our technicians that worked with us on the radar scopes. And I did get some warnings that if you jog, don't go by yourself. And part of the other things too is about 2 months before I arrived, one of the technicians got captured by the Viet Cong. And so we were always very conscious of that as well. So and frankly, we always were armed when we went jogging. To my knowledge, no one ever tried to shoot a rock ape.
Gotcha. So really that warning potentially could have been not so much towards the rock apes, like be careful of the rock apes, but it could have been be careful that we just had a guy get captured by the Viet Cong and we don't want you to get captured. Yeah.
And telling us about the rock apes, to me, didn't sound like a warning at all. It was just, hey, here's something interesting that's on the mountain kind of thing.
That's really cool. When this is, I apologize if this comes across as me not having a lot of knowledge about this time in history. Were there any points where you would have been talking directly to the Vietnamese and this would have been referenced in conversation?
That's a very good question. And yeah, we were co-located with a Vietnamese unit that also, they did the radar control of the Vietnamese aircraft. And I got to know quite a few of them. And I don't recall that ever coming up. We talked about a lot of different things, food and what we like to eat and those kind of things. But I don't ever recall them saying anything about the rock apes one way or the other.
Sure. Were there any other strange events that would happen on this mountain area that you're stationed at besides the sightings and interactions with the rock apes?
No, just being there was strange, but knowing that there are people out there shooting at you I can't think of anything that would be out of the ordinary in a war zone that occurred. Everybody's pretty much worried about keeping their butts alive. I can't think of anything other than that, just being aware that the apes were there.
When you would see them grimace at you, were you able to get a look at what the teeth actually looked like?
Yeah, I did. Very much like a baboon or a chimpanzee, long canines. It was obvious they were omnivorous. They ate meat. They ate there were a lot of different fruit trees that grew on the mountain and that kind of thing, even after the Agent Orange was sprayed.
So it sounds like the interactions continued to happen even after like Agent Orange was sprayed in the area.
Yes.
Okay. Did that affect how the apes treated the servicemen that were on the mountain?
No, I don't think I could make a connection between the two. I don't think so.
Gotcha. So it wasn't like increased aggression or anything after the spraying started?
Not that we could tell.
Gotcha. Man, that's fascinating. So what you had... Oh, okay. How about this? Did anyone attempt to take any photos or videos? Because there would have been, from what I think I know, there would have been individuals that had taken media types of photos and videos in that war, correct?
Correct. Oh yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah. Do you know if anyone was like, hey, I'm going to go take a picture of the rock ape or a video and try to get this documented? Anything like that ever come up?
There may have been. I don't recall ever seeing photos. And most of the guys that had cameras were using film to create slides rather than printed photos. I don't know why that was the case, but almost everybody just created slides. So we didn't sit and look at each other's slides very much. They would mostly just ship them back home. So there may have been. I never saw any.
There's also something that I want to ask about in just really quick. There is I don't even know if you would call it an urban legend or anything. There's posts that have gone around in the last few years that there was a form of early night vision goggles that were used in the Vietnam War. And then individuals were stopped from using them because of what they would see. Is that anything that you had run into during your time there?
No, it is true. There was a form, but it was a handheld device, and you could only look at it through one eye. And it was pretty rudimentary. I have not heard of anybody being told not to use it, but those were mostly the ones that I'm aware of that were using them were what we today would call special forces.
Okay.
CIA guys that they maybe only go one or two of them at a time into the bush. They were assassination squads, for lack of a better term, and they used night vision goggles, but I never heard anybody tell them not to use them at all. But they had a very specific mission.
And so first off, thank you so much for being extremely candid about your time and service over there. And it's just incredible that you have this information that you're able to share, because people have tried to interview people that have had firsthand accounts about this during the Vietnam War, and I don't think a lot of it has really happened. So just thank you so much for being willing to do so.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Thinking back I'll ask it about both places. So thinking back of what you had seen a few times during the Vietnam War, would you categorize what you saw more in the category of it was pretty much an ape that lives in Vietnam, or it was maybe more like some weird type of Bigfoot?
I would say it was more an ape.
Okay.
And I was pretty familiar with animals. When I first went to college, I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I loved animals and was very familiar with them. And I would say, yeah, very much they were an ape-like creature, not a more humanoid that I saw in the swamp, because that was much more a humanoid to me. Like I said, I thought all along it was a hunter.
Gotcha. So really, same question then. In the swamp, what you saw, it sounds like you're not really leaning towards it was some undiscovered ape at all.
totally. It was definitely humanoid, in my opinion, not ape-like. It did not walk or act or anything like an ape.
Fascinating. During your time in Georgia, did you ever hear any other stories of individuals having run-ins with something similar to what you saw that day?
Nobody that saw anything. I've heard people talk about smells and sounds that they didn't understand when hunting, but I never talked to another person that said they saw something.
And so you are currently no longer in Georgia, correct?
Correct. I live in Eastern Washington State.
Gotcha. So Eastern Washington, have you had any interesting things happen up there or heard any things from locals you've met, etc.?
Yes. When I first moved here, I continued hunting quite a bit. So I spent a lot of time in the woods, but I had changed over. I was a bow hunter, and I spent quite a bit of time in the forest in and around in Eastern Washington, hunting deer and elk primarily. And people have talked about seeing something. Almost everybody that I talked to, it was at a very great distance, such that it was a dark spot, or they first thought it was a deer or something, and yet the shape wasn't right, that kind of thing. I've heard those kind of discussions multiple times, but I never had any kind of experience like that at all. And I've been in the woods in snow up to my waist. I've been in the early part of the year when there was no snow, and I've never experienced what I experienced in that swamp.
Joe, what an awesome conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I want to make sure that you were able to share everything that you had come to the show to share today.
Yeah, again, I want to compliment you for what you guys are doing. I think people need to understand that this is real. This is not something that people are imagining or making up or trying to create a hoax. I think there are a lot of people now that are very serious about this, including a number of universities, particularly in the Northwest, that are very serious about attempting to discover what this race of creatures might be.
I definitely agree with you. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much.
Same here, Jeremiah. Thank you. I will continue to follow.
Before we wrap this episode, I want to say something directly to a very specific group of listeners. If you're in the military, any branch or forces, and if you've seen something that no one can explain, or if you're a national park ranger or forestry worker who's been told to stay quiet, or if you're a pilot who's seen something strange down on the ground, or if you're with the FBI, a federal agency, or working intelligence, and you stumbled upon something you're not allowed to talk about, and if you're a firefighter, paramedic, or search and rescue responder who's heard screams or found tracks that didn't make sense, if you're in the logging industry, on a remote oil field, or a trucker with government contracts, and you've had something happen that you've never told a soul, and if you're a biologist, a wildlife specialist, or a field researcher under contract who has found evidence you're not allowed to report, if you're a pastor, a missionary, or someone on a spiritual retreat, and you saw something that shook your faith, or if you work in the shadows, CIA, NSA, or anything with clearance, and you've seen what the public hasn't, then I want to talk to you. Even if it's anonymous, you can reach me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. The world needs to hear what you've been forced to carry alone, and you're not alone. You've got the story. We've got the mic. See you in the woods. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Every encounter we share reminds us that the world is bigger and stranger than we think, and that the truth is often hiding just beyond the tree line. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode, and share this with a friend who's into mysteries, monsters, or the unexplained. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, please follow the show there and leave us a 5-star positive review, because all that helps more people discover the show. And remember, if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot sighting, please, I'd love to hear from you. So email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com and let's start the conversation. If you haven't gotten a chance yet, check out our membership community over at www.bigfootsocietypodcast.com. And that's where you can hear tomorrow's episode today, early and ad-free, and members-only episodes every week. Also, it's a place to connect with other people that are into the Bigfoot subject as much as you are. Thanks again for following along with the Bigfoot Society. Until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there. And see you in the woods.